Professor Narona will be here. He'll present. His project team member, Zubin Savla, is also going to be here. They're going to be presenting a project on that they have been working with at Tata Center. We'll speak more on that. Once this session is over, we'll then take the liberty of showing you the films on Jaggery and Gasifier, depending on how much time is left. Yeah?
Okay, so taking this a little bit out of sequence, and that's because we want to discuss what it takes to push a product out all the way. So actually the question that was asked about waste management, I'll add one aspect to this. One of the reasons we are doing this in the Tata Center as an integrated project which combines things that many faculty members work on is because at the end of the day you need a demonstration unit somewhere if an entrepreneur is going to come forward and convert what's been done as academic research into a business model. Plenty of research being done and we are aware of that, but nothing commercial really successful beyond a certain scale. And one of the issues we have had is in trying to convert academic research into profitable solutions is that we have had to put up a demonstration unit. So you need prototypes which you can demonstrate, and when you are unfortunately doing a project at this scale on energy, you need to essentially process large amounts of biomass, and for which purpose the logical thing to do for us was to actually put up a unit on campus to take care of the campus needs first and then start convincing other campuses to adopt such integrated systems. So there's a larger goal. We're not simply putting together technologies into one unit for the sake of doing it from a research perspective. The larger goal is we hope to convince others policy wise that they should adopt this as a strategy across campuses, and there are several campuses in Mumbai itself which will logically benefit from this. Okay, so the project I'm going to talk to you about is about dealing with cervical cancer. Now the background to this is literally 30 minutes away from us is the top cancer hospital in the country, Tata Memorial Hospital. And we have a research interaction with Tata Memorial. It started about 5 years ago. We have a joint degree program with the hospital, and the intent is to steadily start designing technologies which will benefit both the clinicians but ultimately the patients who come to this hospital. In case you are not aware, people who get cancer in the northeast end up flying to Mumbai for care. Mondays, the patient load at Tata Memorial is twice what it is any other day of the week, because people have come in on the weekend and are expecting to rush in to get some care. If you walk up to this hospital, which is in South Bombay in Parel, you'll realize there are about 150 patients to 200 patients sleeping on the footpath waiting for their turn to get into the hospital to get an appointment with a clinician. Okay, so what's the basic problem there? We have a good hospital. The clinicians are the best probably in the world because of the sheer patient load and the fact that they have to deal with so many patients. But we have not been able to scale this whole process of dealing with cancer. It's still one hospital. Now there's a second one in Kolkata. But that's two major hospitals, Tata hospitals. There's AIIMS, the CMC Vellore, and a few isolated pockets. And if you start thinking of where you are at and what is the nearest cancer center near you, and what is the capacity in that cancer center, you'll realize it's next to poor. So when Tata Memorial came to us, they asked us to deal with all kinds of cancers. What do you think the major cancers are in India? What do you think people are dying of in India? Breast cancer? Not really. Throat? Mostly oral. Why? As I said yesterday, we chew tobacco. And we chew all kinds of tobacco products. So it's oral cancer which is the major problem. What's next? Yeah, well, oral cancer primarily. But with what's happening with pollution around us, we're seeing lung cancer go crazy. Okay, for women, oral, because they also chew tobacco, breast, and cervical. So when a patient gets, and let's take somebody who's in a rural setting, and many of you are coming from relatively rural locations, not metros like Mumbai. So when you come from such locations, when a patient comes from such a location to Mumbai, why do they come to Mumbai? Because they have got the disease at a very late stage and they're close to dying and they need to rush now And this business of stopping what they are doing and rushing now essentially means what? Essentially means that that farm or whatever that they're working on is unattended, because not only must the patient come, but a patient's relative must come and deal with staying on that footpath outside this hospital for a month as you try to get care. Okay, this hospital has this philosophy of not turning anybody away, which is why this happens. People wait. By the way, that's the single biggest reason in the country why people go below the poverty line, because they have a catastrophic healthcare problem like this. And when you go below the poverty line, what we now know, if you look at the numbers and you do a simple analysis, is it takes one generation before you come back above the poverty line. The kids of that family are also doomed because of this. When the patient makes their way to the hospital, who in the hospital deals with this? So let's take cervical cancer because that's our project. Who deals with this? There's a gynecologist. Okay, what else? The gynec diagnoses that it's cervical cancer. What else happens? Who else must come into the picture to deal with this? There's potentially surgery involved, so a surgeon is needed. There's radiation involved, so a radiation oncologist, as they're called, is needed. There is chemotherapy involved. Okay, so a medical oncologist is needed. And how many specialists do you now need to deal with one patient? So when you look at the workload on people, because of the fact that when the patient came, it was a late stage disease. Okay, there's a huge workload on a large number of experts to provide a service to keep somebody alive at a very low cost. If you look at some of the numbers for cervical cancer in the country, the 70,000 that I put up here is an underestimate. The reason is the country does not have a process of systematically going out there and finding out who's got which disease. So these numbers are not just underestimates, they are probably horrible underestimates. We think it's well above 1 lakh. 1 lakh deaths per year, we're not even talking infections. Okay. We, by the way, in India have this record of having 50% of the world's cases as deaths of cervical cancer. Okay, so it's an Indian problem. It's an Indian problem. It so happens that the way this disease occurs is because of a virus called the papilloma virus. It's an infectious virus, it spreads. The human papilloma virus, HPV it's called, it spreads. And how does a virus work? A virus, if you remember some basic biology here, it enters a human cell, it disrupts the human DNA, it inserts its DNA inside the human DNA, and then it amplifies itself, makes copies of itself. But in the process, the human DNA is damaged because something has come into it. The net result, okay, is that a cell has a damaged DNA. That cell slowly starts, most such cells which are damaged will die, but a few of them will start growing at an uncontrolled rate. And that finally escalates into what you see as a lesion. A little later, that lesion grows much bigger as a wound and essentially is a tumor, what we are familiar with as a tumor. It's a slow disease, and that's a major problem because it's a slow disease. It's not like diabetes and hypertension, where the moment you seem to get a symptom, you feel that you have to deal with it. So one of the reasons we have this kind of mortality in the country for cervical cancer is because it's a slow disease. You wait till the disease is well advanced before you feel it important to go see a doctor. Okay, and forget rural areas, even in an urban area, there is no screening. Most women don't think of going forward for a cervical cancer screen. If you think of your relatives, you'll realize most of them have not gone in for a cervical cancer screen. So, in a nutshell, when you look at the problem, and when Tata Memorial told us deal with cervical cancer and deal with the patient load of cervical cancer, okay, you ask the question now, what does it take as an engineer? And I'm a chemical engineer, by the way. What does, and yesterday briefly after that session that I had, questions were asked of me. How do we even engage in such an area? How do you work in such an area when at first sight it's not what you have learned, what your skills are? Okay. So one of the humbling things that you've got to start with is the fact that probably your domain knowledge is irrelevant to this problem. And now you have to ask yourself whether you're going to contribute to this problem or not. Are you going to pretend to be a domain expert in a specific department? Okay. So at the end of the day, it so happens I work on bioprocesses as a chemical engineer. So in some sense, I'm familiar with biology and with engineering. And so at this point, I at least understand the basis of what's going on, if not be an expert in that. And at this point, you make a call as to whether you'll contribute to this problem or not. But contribute how? Do what? And what is the need? So briefly, yesterday I made the point that we need a need statement. What is this need that we have? Deal with cervical cancer, but deal with cervical cancer where? At Tata Memorial or elsewhere? Okay, the answer is very simple. You deal with you deal with cancer not at Tata Memorial, because there's one Tata Memorial. You've got to deal with this problem elsewhere. So in some ways, when the technical challenge came to me, solve the problem of cervical cancer at Tata Memorial, it's the wrong problem statement. Because whatever I do, whatever innovation I come up with to deal with making the doctor's life easy at Tata Memorial will not help, because it simply will not scale. There just aren't enough surgeons and doctors in the country who can use any technology you create. There's a manpower problem. So if you cannot deal with this problem at a hospital level, where will you deal with it? Where should I deal with this? At home. What do you mean by at home? Which home? Whose home? Visualize that. What kind of place needs a solution now? The person who comes to? Yeah, but we don't know that, no? So the person who will come to Tata Memorial is not obvious to us at this moment. The area from where, so we have got to deal with this where that person's at. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Now just visualize this. I walk into a village because the women there, you say, need screening for cervical cancer. Why should a woman come forward for cervical cancer screening? That woman feels probably okay. Yes, she might have some minor discomfort, but you can pass it off as one of many other reasons why she has discomfort. Why would you suspect cervical cancer? These are things we don't want to do. So now if you stop and think about it, this is more than technology. There's a sociology problem here. Why should a woman come forward to be screened? And if you're building a technology, figure out a way to get her screened and figure out a way to get her into the screening process in the first place. Okay, so the problem is not simply one of build a gadget and that magically does something, because there's nobody lining up to use your technology. So there's a bigger aspect which now you've got to visualize. What are you going to do in terms of building a product, and how are you going to get somebody to even end up using the product, and who is this person who's going to go to that village to do this service to that woman? Is a gynec ever going to go to a village and screen? Yeah, but somebody has to reach that product to that woman in a village to even screen herself. And why would a woman buy a product to screen herself? What is this? It's not like a pregnancy kit. It's not like a diabetes measurement, right? Blood sugar measurement. So if you start thinking logically at this point, you realize there's a bottleneck there as well. So where are the bottlenecks now? I've already listed a few bottlenecks, and I'm not even talking of a solution. So if you look at this need, the need is to screen somebody in a village, because that's where most of the cases seem to start. Okay, and therefore the screening in a village business requires somehow some technology to reach the woman in a village, but it also needs what? It needs a way to reach it. So somehow you have to leverage manpower to reach it. When if you stop and think about it, everybody in a village is looking forward to leaving the village and coming to a city. So who is this person who will go the other way into a village and execute a service? The government's not bothered. The government should do this, and I'll give you a number here. The government's investment, no. So that's all. I mean, that's the government saying things, but I've worked with the government. IIT Bombay is the government, by the way, and a number here is the entire government's budget for cancer care is not a separate budget for cancer care. They call it non-communicable diseases, which includes therefore diabetes and hypertension, and the entire country's budget is 400 crores, which is peanuts. Okay. To put that into context, Bahubali, the movie, made 1,000 crores. So the government is not going to do anything, because the government's essentially not in the game at all. So if you're going to create a solution, and I'm going to get there, who therefore finances this, and how does this get done? So how do you do this? So you need a technology, you need to find a person who will go there and execute a service. It's not the gynec, so somebody else. Who is available to you in the village to execute some kind of a sophisticated service, if it's not a gynec? An NGO, how many NGOs are there? How many NGOs and how many employees of NGOs are there? There are not that many. And NGOs, you know what happens? They go into one sector, one village, one district, they park there. What about the rest? So who's going to go in there and deliver a service? Who's available? So at the end of the day, the only schemes available to us, and therefore people available to us, are the ASHA workers and the Anganwadi workers and the midwives, the ANMs and so on. So now you've got to figure out a way to get them to do it, and that's a separate headache, right? Why should an ASHA worker suddenly start doing a cervical cancer screen? What is there for her? What is an incentive for her? Who's going to pay her for this? And if yes, but you are also probably aware that they are not paid on time. The government doesn't pay them, right? So therefore, why should they even do this? I might have a technology. So there's a starting itself. I want to point out to you that the problem is a big problem, and therefore, essentially targeting one aspect of this and building, for example, just a gadget is kind of pointless. Because unless you tackle the other elements of this, your solution is never going to see light of day. And I'm not even talking about at what cost must my technology be, and how do I manufacture it, and how do I make it cost effective in terms of deployment. So before I get there, let me go back and point out that in terms of a research method, the next logical thing you ought to do is to ask, what are the best ways to screen for cervical cancer? Because it's not a new problem. The rest of the world seems to have reduced rates of cervical cancer, right? So they've done something. So what is it? At this point, you do your research. So the research basically says this. There are three ways in which you can diagnose cervical cancer. One is you either detect the presence of the virus directly, and for that you need drops of body fluid, and you process that body fluid just like you would do a blood glucose estimation from a blood drop. You can do some reactions, biochemical reactions, which detect the presence of the virus. There's such things exist. One look at that cost of that, it's 2,000 rupees per test, at least. So you know it's not possible to scale this up across the country. You cannot run a screening camp at 2,000 rupees per patient. Not even patient, 2,000 rupees per person. Remember, only a fraction of them will end up being patients. Okay, the next method, which is the gold standard abroad, is to take a piece of tissue from the cervix, which is where the lesions and tumor occurs ultimately, and you place it on a glass slide, and you pour some reagents on it, and you colorize it basically, and then a pathologist looks at it under the microscope. It's called a pap smear. And it turns out, as I told you yesterday, there are probably around 1,000 competent pathologists in the country. And how much work can 1,000 pathologists do? So you cannot, unless you train armies of pathologists, you cannot dealing with the sample load which will come your way of tissue samples which have to be reviewed for analysis. So that's not a solution. That may be a solution abroad, but that's not a solution for India. So what's the next way to do it? So the next way to do it, it turns out, and this became a long argument between the West and India, was to actually just train people to inspect the cervix and come up with ways of identifying lesions early on. And because it's just inspection, hopefully there's minimal cost associated with the process of going somewhere, finding a woman, inspecting, and coming up with a diagnosis. The catch is, the way gynecs currently work, okay, it's a very non-gadget focused domain. If you go to a cardiac surgeon, he's got all kinds of gadgets, 2D echo, stress test, this, that, ECG. You go to a gynec, she has got one device and it's called a colposcope, which allows her to magnify and visualize the cervix. And that's what is used in a gynec clinic for diagnosis. But how do you get that device out of a clinic and how do you get it into that patient's home? Because you just said you're going to go into a village and screen. And it's a very bulky gadget. So how do you miniaturize it? How do you automate to the extent that you can? And more importantly, how do you digitize it? And why is digitizing important? Because remember, who is doing this in the village? It's a nurse or a midwife. And by the way, most nurses and midwives in our country are illiterate. So you cannot be giving technology to a nurse or a midwife and expecting them to turn into doctors. That's dangerous. Okay? So therefore, you need a model now, if you start and reason this out, where you're giving a technology to a nurse, but all she does is capture data, and she finds a way to get the data across to a gynec, who has to make the final diagnosis, because when you want a diagnosis, it has to come from a gynec. Okay? Just like when you go and expect a consultation about your heart, you want a diagnosis from a cardiologist, even if some other compounder is strapped on an ECG machine to you. Okay, it's the same logic. We want a doctor reviewing what's going on. So that's the background to where we are at in terms of, okay, a solution. So when you look at the current screening methods, okay, The typical approach is to inspect the cervix with some magnification, and in some places as crude as using a magnifying glass. And the problem is there's no record keeping. There's no record keeping of what the gynec has seen. I know literally people drawing circles and saying, I saw something in this quadrant or that quadrant. And that's a big problem because data does not then move. And one of the big problems in this country is different hospitals have record systems which don't talk to each other. One of the big problems with cancer is as patients, for example, as these villagers who are mostly laborers, as they start migrating, their cancer care changes from one hospital to another because when you go to a new hospital, you're told start all your diagnosis all over again. And the treatment you might get might be different from what was proposed in the previous hospital. So there's a big problem. Data doesn't move. So one of the big problems therefore is how do you digitize and keep the data in a central location so that every hospital has access to it, and how do you standardize data? That itself is a contribution. Okay. So we understood all this, and again the question was asked, how long did it take? Well, none of these things happen overnight. It turns out our first attempt at this was to try to figure out how to digitize the pap smear. So what is a pap smear? Take a piece of tissue, place it on a glass slide, image it, digitize it. In our case, digitize it. What normally happens is the pathologist looks at it under a high-end microscope and then figures out whether some cells are misshapen, in which case there's a tumor starting to form there, and so on. But the problem here is if a nurse collects a tissue sample in a village, she doesn't know what to look at under a microscope. So even if you give her a microscope, it's useless. So we said, let's try to digitize the whole slide. So if there's a slide with tissue on it, just like a document scanner scans a piece of paper, you scan the piece of tissue, you convert it into an image, and you send that image to a gynec and ask her to review it. Except there's a problem. When you scan a document, an A4 sheet of paper, that's a 1:1 magnification that you copied as. When I scan a piece of tissue, I need it at a 400x or a 1000x magnification. So I need a microscope scanner. I don't just need a scanner. Okay. So you now have to figure out how to get this as one big image file and then send that to a gynec for review. But again, as I said earlier, not enough gynecs, and it's very likely that this technology would not work. And so one of the things we had to do was to actually point out to ourselves that for reasons other than technology, what we were about to build was going to flop. And then we shifted into building a second device. So that's an important model. You cannot get locked into saying, my original idea is a great idea and I'll continue to work on it, and I'll continue to work on it and get it to market. Because you have to acknowledge when it's going to potentially be a flop. And then spend your energy trying to redesign. Okay, so in a nutshell here, what's missing is that there's no community level screening effort, there's no transferable data system, there's a shortage of trained professionals, okay, there are no affordable and accurate tests, there's no ability to come up with an on-the-spot result, and we are aware that this only happens for the moment in special screening cabs when a gynec decides to go somewhere for a review. What is out there as gadgets in the West in particular are things like these. So the colposcope is what I mentioned to you. This is what we would find in a typical decent gynec clinic to look at the cervix. And there are starting to be portable devices made in Sweden and elsewhere, which are all reasonably portable, reasonably fancy in terms of optics. There's a catch though. All of these things cost quite a bit. So a typical cost of this gadget, for example, is 3 lakhs. Hirandani Hospital, right opposite us, has this. 3 lakhs. Would you give a gadget worth 3 lakhs to a nurse in a village? No. So there's a design challenge now. You've got to design something like this, maybe better than this, with some additional functionality, but at a price point which is what? What's a decent price point? What would you trust a nurse with? No, at what price point would you trust a nurse with a gadget with? A few thousand? No lakhs? No? Okay. Okay, so what we did is go through a process of asking what could we build as prototype gadgets which might offer the same service as that colposcope but portable and at low cost. And at this point, what's involved is what? There's some optics there, because the basic idea is to image a cervix. You're holding this at a distance from the cervix. You have to hold it at a distance for a reason. Whatever technology I bring in, so if you remember I said this is an infectious virus. if there's a contact between your gadget and the cervix, your gadget is now infected, and if you're going from patient to patient, you'll be responsible for spreading the infection. So the whole thing has to be done at a distance. The whole thing has to involve some magnification at a distance. So this is not like your smartphone. Your smartphone has optics in it, does some magnification if you zoom in, but it doesn't zoom in at a distance of 30 centimeters, which is where the cervix ought to be relative to my gadget. Okay. So we went through a process of asking, would a mobile phone work? Could we simply leverage a mobile phone and then add up optics onto it and get this? And can you give me a reason? We finally said no. Can you give me a reason why you think this is a good idea or why you think this is a bad idea? It's an important process again. I just want to reflect that you cannot fall in love with your own ideas here, and you have to challenge to see why something may be a good idea or a bad idea. So the whole point is, if you think about it, one of the most contaminated devices even now with you guys is your phone. If I were to take it to a microbiology lab and try to find out what's growing on your phone, you'll be surprised. Okay. So a phone, unfortunately, will end up being a device which has other uses than cervical cancer screening. So it's not smart to therefore have access to a technology which can have multiple uses. You want a dedicated device just for this. In fact, if you stop and think about it, if I can go look at the cervix, I can go look at your mouth. And I can find lesions in your mouth. And if I can detect cervical cancer, I can detect oral cancer. But again, I don't want to use the same gadget for cervical cancer and oral cancer because of the risk of cross-contamination between patients. Dedicated devices. So the final gadget that we have built is this. Is this. And one can go through the bill of materials that's involved in this. And if you look at the design, it's designed basically to be handled. There's a battery in here, there's some optics, there's a screen. It allows for capture of images like you would with your phone. It allows for capture of a video. There's a USB, so you can pull the data and push it somewhere. There's an SD card. You can store your data on an SD card and transfer the SD card. Okay. There's a tripod. You can mount it on a tripod if you want to. You can hold it with your hand if you want to. Okay. So an important point here is all of this did not happen at once. We had to go through processes where we talked to gynecs, we had to talk to nurses, we had to understand how they would handle these devices. This is what it would look like from a distance. So if you're holding a fist from a distance on this technology, this is what it would look like. Okay, the whole kit. Okay, and these are actual images which we got as we started taking these into the field. These are images taken by trained technicians. When I say trained technicians, one of the things we had to do was to get them to hold it steady, so they take a very steady image. They can capture it, and the idea was to capture the data and then send it to a gynec for review. Now, what I didn't tell you is that you can amplify this image by doing a very simple thing. If you take the cervix, and you would have seen this, if you have had a wound and you put a band-aid on it and you peel back the band-aid, does the skin change color? The skin over the wound in particular has changed color relative to the rest of your. Okay, so it's a simple trick. Therefore, damaged tissue will stain differently than normal tissue. So therefore, if you take tissue and in this case you stain with acetic acid, vinegar, or you take tissue and you pour iodine over it, you can see the lesion here. So the same cervix, the lesion. So this is like a paint. You can paint it and you can amplify the image, and you very clearly now see where the problem is. And why is this important? Because you will find vinegar and iodine in a village. Okay, so now you in theory have the ability to, a nurse can essentially apply this, can visualize, can record it and relay the data to a gynec for review. The nurse probably already knows, looking at this you know there's a problem, but it's not for the nurse to diagnose. Some gynec better diagnose. What next happens is that you don't sit back and say that you built a gadget which everybody should buy, because there's no reason yet that people should rush out and buy your technology. So how do you get this to market? Just because IIT Bombay has built a gadget doesn't mean every cancer hospital out there should start using it. So you need to go through a process where you validate your technology, and what we have done is actually, well, we needed to make multiple copies of a gadget and distribute these, and we deliberately distributed them all over the country, not just next to us in Maharashtra. It was important for us to find out what happens in a high-end hospital, what happens in Assam, where you've got no infrastructure, what happens in Bihar, where there's again very little infrastructure, what happens in the south, where the level of healthcare is in general better. And we deliberately made 20 copies and we literally gave them away for free. Now, to make 20 copies and give them away for free, you need a little money. You need some money. At this point, what is the cost of this gadget? The hardware costs us in terms of a bill of materials around 20,000. That's because we have made these at very small scales. Just we are making them in tens, and they are locally assembled. And they're all, if you look at those, they're all 3D printed or simple molding kinds of prototypes. They are not final prototypes. These are prototypes. The idea is for us to quickly build something, evaluate it, figure out if it's working, if it's good. If it's good, we'll find a way to drive the costing of that particular version down. Okay, so you go through this process of therefore creating as many variants as you can and then quickly figuring out how people are reacting to these variants. And that's what we did. And by and large, it turns out because there was nothing at this price point in the country, everyone was so happy that these copies never came back to us. So they're still being used in these 20 places. So that immediately tells us there's a need. Okay, to make 20 copies at whatever it is, 20,000 bucks per copy, you need money. So who's going to give you money? I sit on DBT as a reviewer and so on. I can tell you that if I go to DBT and ask for money, the Department of Biotechnology, I will not get money fast enough for this. So this is at a point now where you think about it. You need money to actually have a team to do some R&D. Then you need money to make copies to field trial your product. Then you need money to scale your manufacture. And I need money for a clinical trial. Why a clinical trial? Because at the end of the day, if IIT Bombay writes up a certificate saying this solves cervical cancer, nobody cares. The clinical community has to accept this as a technology, and for the clinical community to accept this, it turns out there's an unusual experiment that I need to do. And finally, the responsibility for doing that experiment is on the engineer who innovated, not on the surgeon. So what is this experiment? The experiment is, if I give this gadget to a nurse in a village and ask her to screen a woman for cervical cancer, and she collects this image and relays it to a gynec sitting in an urban hospital, and at the same time a gynec locally diagnoses, and if this local gynec and the remote gynec arrive at the same diagnosis, then what do I prove? Then I prove that in the hands of a nurse, I can initiate a process which will finally give you the same outcome as an expert coming there and doing something. And I have essentially shifted a task from an expert to somebody who's not an expert. Okay, which means now there is the possibility of finding more such paramedics, more such nurses, and scaling my technology. Why is this important? Because if I look at the number of gynecs in the country and the number of gynecs in the country who would want this to screen, okay, village women, it's like there might be 20 to 100 socially conscious gynecs out there. But if I find a way to get this technology into every nurse or every midwife, how many of them are there in the country? In the lakhs. So I create a market. So look at it as a market. You create a market where there's no market. Okay. Now all of this is fine, but that nurse, by the way, doesn't know what cancer is. She doesn't know what cervical cancer is. So one of the things it turns out in parallel we had to do was to create animations, training material in other words, videos, small videos, to explain what cancer was, to explain what cervical cancer was, to explain how this technology would get used. And unless you did that, the nurse is incapable of handling your technology. And for that matter, the patient is scared from using your technology. So it turns out this effort on creating awareness material played a big role later on in what has turned out to be a reasonable success for us in rollout. Okay, so the clinical trial is something we are doing with the hospital in Chennai. We have made copies of this. Okay, and what we have done is actually now engage in a large project with the Tata Trust, where the intention is to go into the Northeast, and we are going to screen all of the Northeast, because by the way, the biggest incidence of cervical cancer is in the Northeast of India. What is that percentage? We don't know, because nobody has actually gone into the Northeast and systematically counted cases. So it will be the first ever attempt. So at this point, what we have managed to do is, thanks to the clinical trial, thanks to the nationwide rollout of a few copies, we managed to convince clinicians that this was the way to go forward. One more point, we are collecting images. One of the things I teach is machine learning. And it would have been very logical for us to just say, let's digitize, okay, the cervix, and then in an automated fashion try to find out where the lesions are. Forget the gynec, forget any human inspecting this data, you could automate this. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? Sorry? So the shortage, so the lack of trained manpower can be offset by having software do some diagnosis. So that's how we thought. And then you go into the field, and there's a problem in the field. What is that problem? Do you want a nurse to handle a gadget which now has some logic on top of it, which allows her to behave as if she's a doctor? In which case she'll behave like a doctor. If you give her the opportunity to behave like a doctor, she will behave like a doctor. She'll probably start making money as a doctor would, which would make doctors unhappy. Right? The gynec who's supposed to be the expert in the urban setting who receives this data is now out of the loop. Right? So there's a problem there. So technology for the sake of technology is pointless. Once again, that's a hard learning. We can do machine learning, but do you need machine learning when you don't have manpower? You try to find a way to keep the experts in the loop, and all we have done for the moment is keep the experts in the loop and push them this data. You can always do machine learning later. What we do know from quiet experiments that are being done is that the machine learning is superior to a gynec. So if you look at 5 different gynecs reviewing the same data, they'll come up with different diagnoses. The software is superior to an individual gynec. So it has to go down the road of software doing the predictions down the road. But how do you do this? How do you do this by giving this technology to a nurse? We don't know. So there's an ethics problem, okay, which is essentially a bigger problem. Finance. A point briefly was made yesterday about how you can leverage funding. I think Sachin has been, Professor Patwardhan has been talking about CSR to you. What's very unique about this product is it has been entirely funded by donations. And if you think about it, when you create a one slide sales pitch, and I'm not even talking of a 30-page proposal that you normally write to DST or somebody, you write a one slide sales pitch and you go to a corporate and say, look, this might help women, it might help women in a rural setting. There's an education aspect because we're going to train women about all these things, and that itself, by the way, is a product. Corporates will bend over backwards to fund such projects. Corporates will not fund a gadget. Corporates will fund the fact that you are actually providing a service to a woman, and that involves a gadget, that involves training, that involves you trying to figure out how to scale the manufacture. We have a very curious business model for this. What was the cost of that imported product which is selling in India right now? 3 lakhs. We are trying to sell something at what? 20,000. If you license a technology to somebody like a BPL to scale up manufacturing, at what price point will BPL sell it at? They'll sell it at 2.9 lakhs. Okay? And one of the reasons they're going to do that is because such gadgets don't exist even in an urban market. Forget rural market. So how do you get a technology out at the price point you want it at? And having done all this work, there's a risk that if you simply hand it over to somebody else, that at the end of the day the price is jacked up and the whole point of innovating and designing is lost. So where ironically the pressure has come on to us is for us to manufacture it ourselves and not necessarily hand it over as a licensed technology to somebody else, because the only way to guarantee a price point is for us to manufacture it. So this is one of those weird products where the government's not going to sponsor it because the government's not going to screen cancer at all. The government's not bothered for the moment. Most of its investments right now are in diabetes and hypertension. I told you that number of 400 crores. Okay, the government's spending 400 crores on cancer. The Tata Trusts, in comparison, are spending 500 crores on creating cancer hospitals in Assam in one state. Look at the mismatch. Okay, and if that is a scale of funding you need in each state, the government's never going to get into the game, which means the government's never going to buy a product. If the government's not going to buy a product, how do you get a product to the market? And this is true for, in some ways, waste management and so on and so forth. You all will realize that these are good ideas. They need to go out there. They need to find the market. But which investor is going to come forward? And if an investor comes forward, where's a guarantee that it will go at the price point that you want it at in terms of a social impact? So it turns out that the curious way to do this is to again leverage donation funding. So given that CSR mandates that corporates give away 2% of their profits, there's more than enough money as corporate profits, which one can leverage into now making copies. So on the one hand, you receive this money, you make your copies, and you give it away as gifts. You don't sell it. You don't sell it in a conventional business model sense, but you just manufacture it and give it away. And it turns out that's one way of making all the copies that the country needs. And that's true for some of the other gadgets that we are coming up with in this space. So it's important, therefore, to connect with corporates around you. And that's why I wanted some extra time to talk about finance, because a lot of you were concerned about two things yesterday, which is how do you even get into such projects, and B, how do you finance them? And I wanted to understand two things. One is that at the end of the day, this kind of a project involves multiple disciplinary skill sets coming into the picture. So just think about it. Who do you think I needed to execute a solution like this? I'm a chemical engineer, but there's no chemical engineering happening here at all. So who do you need in a team? And I needed to assemble a team. One of the reasons we created a Tata Center is because, ironically, even in IIT Bombay, this was a way for us to create a multidisciplinary team. If I sit in chemical engineering, I'll only find chemical engineers. I can only solve chemical engineering problems. If you want to solve a healthcare problem, I need access to different skill sets. So either you make friends with people from other departments, or else you find a way to get funds in and recruit people with different backgrounds. Okay, so you need a mechanical engineer clearly. You need electrical engineers, maybe optical engineers. What else? There's a software angle here. I have to push data onto a cloud. Maybe I want to do machine learning. Who else do I need? I need people to go talk with patients in the field. And engineers are totally hopeless at this. So you need people with a social science background. Okay, you need people who can go talk to doctors and gynecs. And by the way, you need girls, because this is a problem for women. Males are not going to be allowed into such clinics. Okay, so pretty much, despite Zubin who's standing here, it's an all-girl team which initiated the work to solve a woman's problem. Okay, and the point of it is it can be done, and the moment you realize it can be done, it flips. It flips to the point where funding comes, where people want to be a part of it. You'll realize, one of the things you'll realize is that corporates are desperate for stories like this. Because the kind of publicity they get out of associating with this is huge. Which is why it's important for you to find a problem in your immediate area, whether it is something in your department or not, and find a way, and this is where the Tata Center can work with you, find a way to steadily improve it to the point where you have a very clear statement which says how you're going to address this problem at multiple levels. Build a technology, awareness, dissemination, skilling of people, a business model which may or may not be unique, address it at different levels. And where corporates go is this question as to whether it is a sustainable route of getting this product to the stakeholder. And at that point, that is something we can help you with in creating a pitch of sorts. You'll realize that the finance which comes in is more than what your college gives, more than what TechWhip gives, and more what the government will give you. So it's important that you be ambitious about these things. Okay, one last point, I'm not going to boast about numbers, but what this has done is it has made me free of government finance. I live off of donations in doing my research, and this subsidizes all the classical research that I want to do in my own department. So it's important to understand this. Thank you. Yeah, if there are questions, I'm glad to take them. If not, we'll play a video.
This is Rohan, and this is Vishwambar. Pankaj and Rohan are Tata Fellows. They are the master students who we give fellowships to at Tata Center. Vishwambar has been a project staffer with an engineer with Tata Center, working specifically on the Jaggery project, which Professor Mahajani spoke to you about yesterday. We are going to show you a short video clip on the entire process. After which, if you have questions, if you need clarifications, this team is here to answer your doubts.
We are now going to narrate to you a story on jaggery making and how the research and development team at IIT Bombay moved from a traditional cottage-based industry to a continuous technology-driven process. Historically, jaggery has been understood by consumers as a natural product, and with that value attached, it has more and more preference from the urban communities over the white refined sugar. Just to give you a little idea on the total production in the year 2010, all across India, we made something like 10 million tons of jaggery. Jaggery making is currently prominent in the states of Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. So the raw material for making this particular product is sugarcane, and the essential characteristic of this particular distributed small scale production unit is located at the sides of the farmers' fields, because obviously the advantage of transportation of cane to the production unit and the production capacity in batch mode of 8 to 10 hours per day in a season of about 120 days is something like 1 to 2 tons per day. Before we undertook this project on an intervention to develop a new innovative process, in order to understand the problems, because we had noticed about 6 to 7 years back that while the demand and consumption was almost the same or to an extent increasing, the production had been decreasing, and the primary reason for this was that the process was very labor intensive. To give you an example, 10 years ago, there was something like 900 units working in a single district of Kolhapur in Maharashtra state. But in today's time, there are only 500 to 600 units which are operational. In order to understand the problems in this sector, we undertook a survey of jaggery making units, and we surveyed something like 400 jaggery making units. What we found there was the unavailability and the reliability of labor in the season. When we wanted to produce, the labor was not available. So therefore, we did a survey and found out that there is a great deal of interest in a process which can be a little less drudgery driven and a lot more user friendly. Therefore, what we did was try to understand the conventional batch process. Now, let's look at the conventional process which is traditionally practiced in jaggery making units all over India. Cane is first crushed in the crusher and the juice is transferred to the heating pans. Now, these pans are typically about 12 to 13 feet diameter, very large, and are heated from the bottom with the help of the gas. The gas is burnt in a furnace and the juice is then clarified by adding various additives. In jaggery making, lime addition is a very crucial step. Lime is added to adjust the pH of the juice, typically from 4.7 to 6.4. This is to precipitate the major impurities out and make clarification easy. Furthermore, a higher pH prevents inversion of sucrose to glucose and fructose, thereby increasing the hardness and shelf life of the product. In the conventional process, lime addition is done only based on the judgment of the master craftsman, as there is no pH measurement done in this case. Whereas in our process, which is the newly developed process at IIT Bombay, we have completely automated the lime addition and made it operator independent. Now, while doing this, we have to have a man standing there all the time. The precipitate that is formed in this case floats over the surface. This has to then be removed continuously, and that is how clarification takes place. So this is a very high labor intensive process, whereas in our process at high temperature, the flocculants that are added are different, because of which the precipitate has a high density and it settles down, and this makes the process very easy, wherein the precipitate settles down and a clarified juice comes out from the top. This particular process doesn't need any labor at all, and if it is controlled in a precise way, that is how it would be. In a conventional process, once the juice is clarified, it is subjected to evaporation for about 2 to 2.5 hours. It is a continuous heating going on, and the water vapors are coming out, and all the time the person standing there has to look at the scum that is coming out from the surface and remove it. Now during this period, he keeps on adding several additives to maintain the color, maintain the pH and so on. The juice gets almost ready for crystallization. The master craftsman who is responsible for operating this particular process as a skill has to know whether the evaporation is over and if the juice is ready for crystallization. So, he performs something called as the Goli test, which is more of an art than a science, and this is an indication of how much moisture is present in the juice. So, once the evaporation is over, the juice is transferred to another pan wherein it is cooled down to some extent. That is from 118 degrees centigrade to 70 to 80 degrees centigrade. During this process, the juice gets thickened further and the crystallization starts happening. There is a lot of labor required in this process to stir this thick syrup for about 15 to 20 minutes so that you get nice crystal jaggery. In our process, we are following a different way of evaporation. It is a continuous process, which means the clarified juice that comes from the clarifier goes through different pans. Now it is continuously flowing. There is no manual intervention required in this case. So as it flows from the first tank to the second tank and to the last, there is a continuous heat that is produced and provided to these pans, and water evaporation takes place. The residence time is adjusted in such a way that by the time the juice comes to the last pan, the concentration is just ready for crystallization. Now, you can see a crystallizer that we have used in this particular case, and that it is much different from the crystallizer that is used in the conventional process. We are doing continuous crystallization here. It's a screw type crystallizer wherein the hot thick syrup falls in and gets transferred from one end to the other end. And while this happens, crystallization takes place because of the turbulence that is created. And at the same time, the screw that is rotating all the time takes care of the transferring or conveying the hot syrup from one end to the other. Otherwise, it will not flow. So this particular equipment, which has a conveying screw, not just plays a role of conveying the stuff, but also ensures that it amounts to crystallization. Again, we are saving a lot of labor in this activity. Once the jaggery is ready, it is in the form of a thick paste and it is a semi-solid material which has some ability to flow. This is then filled in molds, and you can see in the conventional process that it is again done manually with a lot of labor required. It is allowed to cool down for about half an hour when solid jaggery is formed. Then demolding is done and the product is sent to the stores. In our process, we have automated this molding process as well. So we have designed a new molding machine wherein you have different molds of different sizes and the required different shapes. They are used to collect the juice coming from the crystallizer and they are moved on the belt. And again, the residence time of this mold is adjusted in such a way that by the time the demolding happens, you have the jaggery ready in solid form. The time is of the order of 25 to 30 minutes. Since this is an automated process, it is expected that we require not more than one person to actually control the entire operation. Another big advantage here is that since we have this machine taking care of the continuous process of molding and demolding, it is quite possible that we can have different sizes and shapes that are required by the markets. In a conventional process, the way the heating is done is, you have the bagasse that is generated in a crusher which has about 50% moisture. Now this bagasse has to be dried. So it is transferred on a large piece of land, spread out and sun dried. And you can look at the labor that is required for this particular activity. It is allowed to get dried for about a day or so. That means you need a large piece of land. Again, this has to be a fertile land. Otherwise, one can grow sugarcane on it. So, we are losing that much land just for drying. Now, this bagasse when dried is collected and sent to the furnace. It doesn't just end there. You have a person sitting or standing at a furnace, continuously feeding this dry bagasse to the furnace. A batch of about 2 hours, this person is standing and collecting bagasse and feeding it to the furnace all the time. It is a highly laborious, painful job, and not many people are prepared to do this kind of work. Now, once this bagasse is fed to the furnace, which is a pit furnace, it is known that the efficiency of the pit furnace cannot go beyond 40 to 50%. So, the flue gas that is emitted to the surrounding, that is, which comes out of the chimney, has a temperature of the order of 400 to 500 degrees centigrade minimum. That means we are losing so much heat to the atmosphere, and at the same time there are some particulate emissions happening. So overall, the heating system that is used in conventional jaggery making is less efficient and polluting. In the new process, we have an indirect heating system. The primary source of heat is bagasse itself. It is conveyed by the bell to the rotary dryer in which it is dried. Now for drying, the heating medium is the exhaust gas that comes from the burner itself. This bagasse on its way gets dried, and this dry bagasse goes to the burner wherein it is burnt. Now this hot flue gas imparts heat to the thermic oil which circulates inside a burner. Thermic oil takes heat from the burning bagasse and then goes to the plant, imparts heat, especially the evaporators, and of course the clarifier. Because we do this kind of indirect heating, the energy efficiency goes up to almost 70 to 75%. With such high efficiency, we save a lot of the gas. To end the story now, it's time for acknowledging the efforts from different organizations and individuals. So the development process took us about 4 to 5 years, and the initial phase of the project was funded by Rajiv Gandhi Science and Technology Commission of Maharashtra State. In the latter part, mostly for automation, the Tata Center for Technology and Design gave the financial funding, and the pilot plant is located at the premises of Tatya Sahib Kore Institute of Engineering and Technology, Varna Nagar. We are grateful to their support. Additionally, we must definitely mention the most important support that the team has got from students both at IIT Bombay pursuing PhD and the Master's program, as well as students from 2 engineering colleges, Tatya Sahib Kore Engineering Institute and the Sharad Institute of Technology, which is located in the Kolhapur district of Maharashtra. Thank you.
We are open to questions if there are any. Vishambar who can assist with that.
Tied up with FCL Group, Future Consumer Limited Group. This year we did some trial with them. Next year we will be doing tie-up with more industries.
It's going to be a large retail group of some kind which can market all this jaggery and would appreciate the fact that there's a better quality control given that it's a instrumented continuous process.
For around 10 tons per day, it is around 5 crores. We are working on optimization. 10 tons per day. Jaggery making, 10 tons per day jaggery. That is around 100 tons per day sugarcane. 10 tons, yes.
Okay, so no more questions, then let's move back to the main auditorium.